Today I'd like to show you another game that I have written in BASIC. The game is called CH Goes Skiing. And surprise, it's a skiing game. If the title of the game might confuse you, well, CH is my nickname, so it's a game about me, I suppose. I've never been skiing in real life though, so the game is purely fictional. This game was originally released for the C64 in the first Christmas magazine, which I already showed you in my last video. Here you can see the full listing of the game, and as you can see, it's quite short. But nonetheless, it's a completely working game. It's very simple, even simpler than the game in my last video. But I'm somehow proud of it because it's such a simple yet still playable listing, and I just love the fact that it's possible to code something like that with just a few lines on an 8-bit computer. So I thought, why not create a MEGA65 version of it, using some of the new BASIC commands and maybe adding some new features. Now, since the MEGA65 has a C64 mode, let's first try to run the original version. We enter C64 mode by typing Go64 and confirm with yes. And now we see our well-known C64 start screen. Now let's load the game by typing load. By the way, on the Mega we can actually omit the "8" because the disk drive is the default drive now, as there is no more tape port. So now we've loaded the game and let's run it. And there it is. As you can see, it's very simple. It just consists of text mode characters, but this is something I really love about old computers. You can simply create a recognizable scene, in this case of someone skiing downhill, with just a few of those built-in graphic characters. It is simple and maybe a bit crude looking, but everyone knows instantly what it's supposed to be. So again, this game might be nothing special or anything crazy, but it shows that it doesn't need a lot of code to be able to have something playable on your home computer, and it doesn't take ages to be typed in. And it's fun to toy around with it, improve it, change it, create new versions of it, and so on. Now, one interesting thing about this game is that the scrolling is done entirely by the built-in scrolling that happens when you print stuff onto the text screen. As I just said before, the whole game simply consists of text mode graphical characters, and they're just printed on the screen, line by line. So as the last line of the screen is reached, the screen scrolls up automatically. This is very convenient for such a game, because with that we don't have to do anything special in order to scroll. But what you're seeing now is already full speed. The game is running as fast as possible on the C64 in BASIC, and there isn't any way to speed anything up from here really. Of course, it's working pretty fine for this game, as the speed feels quite right, but it wouldn't be possible to add any sort of improvements to the game, like for example a status bar or some other features you might think of. So we're really at our limits here, as far as BASIC on the C64 can go. But fortunately, we're not on a C64 here, we're on the MEGA65. And one cool thing about this particular game is that it actually runs unmodified in MEGA65 mode. The only thing we have to do is to switch into 40 color mode, which, as I mentioned in my last video, can be done by pressing the escape key followed by the X key. But a user called Mindrail told me that it's also possible by simply hitting the F1 key, which I honestly didn't know yet. So thank you, Mindrail, for pointing that out. Now, when we're about to run this game in MEGA65 mode, the game will run at 40 MHz, which is way too fast. So in order to create a proper MEGA65 version of the game, we'll have to add some delay into the game loop to slow it down a bit. But first, let's have a look at the various CPU speeds of the MEGA65. The C64 ran at 1 MHz, which we just saw earlier. The C128 was able to run at 2 MHz, but this wasn't possible under all circumstances but I won't go into detail for that now. The C65, which the MEGA65 is based on, would have run at 3.5 MHz, and the MEGA65's native speed is even much higher, as it is 40 MHz. Now, using the speed command in BASIC, we can tell the CPU of the MEGA65 to run at exactly those speeds. So let's try to run the game at its original speed again, 1 MHz. For that we simply type speed 1, hit return, and then run the game again. As you can see, the game is now running exactly as before when we were in C64 mode. Now let's try to run it in 3.5 MHz mode. For that we can type speed 3.5 or simply speed 3. Both of these options will tell the CPU to run in 3.5 MHz mode. Now the game is already running considerably faster. This is the speed we would have had on a real C65. So now you might think that you can use any kind of number here and run the CPU at any speed you like, but sadly that's not possible. So you can't just enter speed 17 or whatever. Well, you can, but any number apart from 1 or 3 or 3.5 for that matter will set the CPU speed to the default one, which is 40 MHz. So it doesn't matter what you type, every number except 1, 3 or 3.5 will be exactly the same as if you simply typed speed 40. You can even leave out the number completely and just enter speed, and the CPU will also run at 40 MHz. Actually, I really like being able to change the speed that way, because it's interesting to see what your programs would look like on a different machine. So for example, I encourage you to run the game from my last video, The Wall, in 1 MHz and 3.5 MHz mode, just to see how things would have looked like on a real C64 or on the C65. So far, whenever I coded something in BASIC on the MEGA65, at some point I always got curious and tried the other speeds, just for the sake of knowing how fast it would have been. Okay, so back to the skiing game. So far we looked at the original C64 version, but how about a dedicated MEGA65 version? Here we go, this is the official MEGA65 edition of CH Goes Skiing. The game itself isn't much different, but I changed quite a few things in the code and I also added a few brand new features, which I'd like to show you now. At first I changed some obvious things, like using the color command instead of using control codes within my print statements. This makes the listing much more readable. Also, there was no need to move the cursor around using control codes, which you can see here for example. Instead, I simply used the cursor command. Also, I renamed some variables and added some RAM comments in order to make the listing a bit cleaner and easier to read. On the MEGA65 at 40 MHz, those things won't really slow the program down, so just go for it. On a C64, well, you better keep the listing as short as possible if you want to go skiing. Another thing, of course, was to use the joy function to read the joystick. On the C64 this had to be done using a poke, as there was no dedicated joy command available. Then of course the sleep command had to be used to slow the game down a bit. As demonstrated before, it would otherwise be running way too fast on the MEGA65. So we sleep for 75 milliseconds here in order to slow the pace a bit. Now let's talk about the added features. At first I added a status bar to the top of the screen. For this I also used the cursor command to position the cursor to the top left and top right part of the screen and then print the travel distance and amount of health to the screen. Another added feature is a game over screen and a possibility to restart the game by pressing the fire button. In order to display the game over message on the screen, I tried the window command, which restricts text output to a certain area on the screen. So even clearing the screen would only clear that particular area. That way I was able to quickly make room for the text without any trees being still visible in the background. However, the downside is that sometimes when cancelling the game using run stop, the ready prompt will be shown inside this window, and if a user doesn't know how to get out of this, he might feel a little bit lost. but as many of you might know already, just hitting run, stop and restore will do the trick. For making the game over screen a little bit nicer and even make it use a bit more of the MEGA65 special features, I used the color command to cycle through the additional 16 colors that the MEGA65 offers right after the original 16 colors. These are arranged like a rainbow, so they provide a nice flashy effect. And of course I wanted to add some sound effects and music. At first I tried to use the sound command for creating the sound effects and the play command for the music, but then I quickly noticed that the sound command is already too limited for what I wanted the crashes to sound like. But I found out that it's possible to use the play command for sound effects as well. The play command can play up to 6 sequences in parallel on 6 individual sound channels, and when omitting a channel, the currently playing sequence will still keep on playing, while it's possible to add another sequence on a different channel to be played immediately, which in this case would be the sound effect. Now this might sound a bit confusing, but in order to demonstrate this, let me show you a small example. Let's assume you have a music sequence like this. This means use instrument number 5, switch to octave 1, play the note C, switch to octave 2, play the note C again, and finally loop, which means repeat from the beginning. Now the music will play forever. Now let's consider we would like to play a small sound effect like this. So this means use instrument number 0, switch to octave 4, play the note G, then switch to octave 5 and play the note C. As you can see, we don't use an L this time, as we don't intend to loop this one. It shall only play once. Now the previous sequence got cancelled as our sound effect played. This is because we tried to play it on the same channel. But as I said before, it is possible to play those sequences on their individual channels by doing, for example, something like this. Now both sequences play at the same time and the music loop keeps on playing. Now in order to play the sound effect during the game on demand, we can simply do this. This means we simply omit the sequence for the first channel, that is before the comma, making the original sequence simply continue playing, and then we play our sound effect on the second channel after the comma. And that's it. By the way, omitting parameters by simply adding a comma is something that you might see more often on the MEGA65, because there are lots of commands that allow to skip a few parameters in case you don't want to specify them, which might have various different effects depending on which command you're using. So, as I mentioned already in my last video, if I inspired you to create something nice and basic on your own, please consider submitting something to the MEGAZINE project, which will be a printed magazine with hopefully lots of great little basic programs for other users to type in. If you'd like to know more about this, I recommend to watch my last video or have a look into the description. So that's all for today. I hope you had some fun and let me know about your skiing high scores. And don't forget to save your code from time to time.